All yours.
Members, the Housing Committee on the Game Animal Council Bill. We move to Part 1. This is debate on clauses 3 to 26. The question is that Part 1 stand part. Moana Mackie.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I had been hoping that the Minister with responsibility for the bill might be in the chair, and hopefully Minister McCulley is able to answer some questions we have about the SOP. I'm not sure that face really inspires confidence that we're going to get an answer to all our questions, but we'll give it a go. Now, the Minister, Nick Smith, has an SOP in his name. And I really hope the Minister is going to take a call on it, because it does appear to actually quite seriously change everything that we did at Select Committee. And I specifically want to refer to the proposed changes to clause 16 in Part 1 of this bill, where we're removing the word recreational.
Which is just before hunting.
So we're going from replace managed for recreational hunting purposes to managed for hunting purposes. Well, given that the entire purpose of this bill was meant to be around recreational hunting, I'm really worried actually about what that change means and whether that completely undermines everything we did in Select Committee. When this bill went through the Select Committee, we were very cognisant of the job that was before us to manage the tensions between the recreational hunting community and the Department of Conservation. That really was our focus. We were recognising the value of the recreational hunting community, recognising that there were actually a number of common goals between the Department of Conservation, the recreational hunting community, and that there were existing relationships which were already very good. There were some existing relationships that were very, very bad, but there was enough common ground for us to work on to bring together the recreational hunting community and those purposes where they aligned with the Department of Conservation's vision and aspirations around pest control and management of the dock estate. So when in the Minister's SOP on Part 1 of this bill, I see that we're removing the word recreational from the legislation. That is deeply concerning, and I hope that the Minister, even if this is an issue that he has to come up to speed with very quickly, is able to get some advice from officials. It's not looking good, is it? It's not looking good. But given that this could potentially completely change the entire purpose of the bill, the member Peter Dunn, in his contribution, mentioned heli hunting, or whatever new name we've given it to make it sound not so awful. And I would like to know what this means in terms of the discussions we had at Select Committee around the hunting of trophy animals from helicopters, because if we're now saying this is no longer about recreational hunting interests and it's just about all hunting interests, that's a completely different kettle of fish, Mr Chair, from every conversation we had at Select Committee. Now, it might be that this is some minor technical amendment that doesn't actually change a lot or is designed for a specific purpose, but I think that the very first thing we need in this debate is some clarification from the Minister and the Chair around what that means. Because why did we have a Select Committee process that spent all its time focusing on the interests of recreational hunters, on how those worked in with the interests of the Department of Conservation and the general public, whom the Minister of Conservation is the steward of that land on behalf of? Why did we go through all that if suddenly this bill is going to be about all hunting interests? And I wonder whether it's because maybe we went down the path in terms of setting of how we were going to pay for this Game Animal Council, of basing it on the number of trophy hunters. Basing it as fees on trophy hunters, and maybe they just want a whole lot more of those. But I wonder, it might be something that the Honourable Peter Dunn might be able to refer to. Because for us, this is very concerning. We've been focused on the interests of recreational hunters, just so I can let the member know what our concerns are about. We've been focused on recreational hunters. This now takes the word recreational out, and to me that's a major change. It's not something that was ever flagged with the Select Committee. If there was an issue with keeping the word recreational there at Select Committee, I don't know why it wasn't raised with us then, albeit it was decades ago that we had this at Select Committee. But maybe the Honourable Peter Dunn is able to take a call on this SOP of Nick Smith and explain why in Clause 16, Mr Chair, why in Clause 16 we're changing managed for recreational hunting purposes to managed for hunting purposes. Because that does seem like a big change to us, and in light of the comments he made about heli hunting as well, it would be good to get some clarification around exactly what that is trying to achieve, and to allay concerns on this side of the House that it's not actually going to make a bill that we're already concerned about worse and take the focus off recreational hunting, which was what we understood to be the entire purpose of this legislation. So I look forward to some clarification on that. In terms of the rest of Part 1 of the bill, when you look at the purposes of this Act, which is to establish a Game Animal Council and provide for its function, to create powers for the Minister to manage herds of special interest, and to allow the Minister to delegate his or her powers to the Council, and to provide for fees and levies to fund the Council and its functions. Our question would be again whether this is an appropriate way to achieve the purposes, the policy intentions of this particular piece of legislation, especially given that official advice from Treasury and from the Department of Conservation has been that this is not the way to go.
That's right.
That in fact this path has the most regulatory burden and has the highest costs, and that in fact there were other options available to the government which would have been far easier, which would have built on existing relationships, built on existing functions, would have identified where those relationships did not exist, and would have done so with far less regulatory burden and at much lower cost. And when you consider that the funding for this bill, $100,000 in the first year and then $50,000 per year after that, is going to have to come from money that's reprioritised within the Department of Conservation, then it becomes even clearer that this pathway and the pathway set out in Clause 3, the purposes part of the Act, is not the appropriate legislative pathway to be taking. This has been a long time in the making. This is work that started under the previous Labor government. The advisory panel provided advice, and none of which is really represented in this piece of legislation. And when you look at what we've come up with, there were far simpler ways to do it, which could have actually been done a lot quicker, which could have been done under existing legislation, either within ministerial powers that already existed, which would not have required legislation at all, or through an amendment to existing legislation, which would have been far simpler than what we see in Part 1 of this piece of legislation. And I know that part of the concern around simply using existing legislative or regulatory tools, such as the ability of the Minister of Conservation to set up a special committee to look into this. There were concerns about the power of the Minister in that role, and these are always tensions that we have to manage in legislation regarding the Department of Conservation, because at the end of the day, what it used to be the case that the Minister of Conservation had sole responsibility for all activities on the conservation estate as the guardian of that conservation estate on behalf of all New Zealanders, and what we continue to see is an undermining of that role. And I think Part 1 of the bill, we see this again. We've had successive pieces of legislation that have taken away the ability of the Minister of Conservation to carry out that very, very crucial role. And again here in Part 1 of the bill we see that further undermining, but for no gain. And it's not saying that you can't have some of the devolution that we see here from the Minister and from the Department to other groups where there are shared goals, where there are shared common interests, and where those tensions can be managed. And in that respect, a lot of what we see in Part 1 and what we'll see in the debate on Part 1 of this bill is it represents a lost opportunity, because I don't think there's any question that there were enormous gains to be made here which would have benefited all parties who were in the process. And that was very clear at Select Committee when we heard from submitters that when we expected to see a much more polarised debate, what we actually saw was a lot of people coming together, wanting to talk about what they wanted to achieve in common, wanting to highlight where those tensions did lie, but saying these are not tensions that can't be managed, and these are not tensions which we can't find a way through, and if we can't, just agree to disagree. There was a lot of goodwill from all sides of the debate, and that's why I feel that this really is a lost opportunity. But I'm going to end my contribution there, but I do come back to clause 16 in the SOP on the bill. It would be really good to have some clarification around that, because that does seem like quite a wholesale shift away from what we were trying to achieve at Select Committee and what the policy intentions were stated to be.
Mr Chair.
Honourable Peter Dunn.
Just to comment on 2 points that have arisen in the debate so far. The first is to